I'm going to do a different type of deep dive. Now, if you've watched some of my deep dives before, I tend to try to do a top-down view, starting at the largest scale, and then hone down lower and lower till you get to the most individual scale of a particular engagement, battle, or conflict. Today, though, I'm going to do some of that, but I'm going to do it in the context of the Valiant Defense Series from DVG Games. And the common factor of these are that they're all part of the Valiant Defense. However, I think that name really came out with either with Soldiers in Postmen's Uniform or with Lanzerath Ridge. This was the first time I've seen it on a box, but they all have they're all part of the Valiant Defense Series, which means that they all share common mechanics, and they all have a common designer, and that's David Thompson. Now, some of these games might have other people that have assisted him or worked with him, primarily maybe on the graphics, but it's all Valiant Defense, and it's all David Thompson. And the third common feature is they're all from DVG Games. Now, DVG Games, Dan Verssen Games, are known for their solitaire games. They do have some multiplayer games, but the vast majority of their current library of games, and at least the ones they're focusing on, are solo friendly, either solo only or solo friendly games, meaning that you can maybe play them cooperative, but they really are solo focused games. That is true for all these as well. The first one in the series was, well, at least the first one released, was Pavlov's House. I think I might have read somewhere in some notes from David Thompson that Castle Itter might have been the first one he started working on, but I think Pavlov's House came out first. I might have that switch. But Pavlov's House, which deals with the Battle of Stalingrad. Then you had Castle Itter, which was towards the end of World War II, and was a very unique situation where you had both U.S. and German forces fighting against German forces, and then that they were trying to, it was kind of a rescue attempt at a kind of a VIP prison, Castle Itter, that held, some political prisoners and some high-level, French politicians. Then the next one to come out was Soldiers in Postmen's Uniform, which is at the very beginning of the war, which was the defense of the post office in Poland under German attack. And then the most recent one to come out is Lanzerath Ridge, which is dealing with the Battle of the Bulge. And that is, again, the most recent one to come out, and it was the first one I think I saw that had the Valiant Defense on the box. Now, another thing that you're going to notice here, not only are these solitaire based, and not only do they share the same mechanics, I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, and the same designer and the same publisher, but they all are telling a unique story. Pavlov's House was a very somewhat of a Alamo situation in the Battle of Stalingrad, where you had a small unit of Russian forces that were holding out against an onslaught of German attackers during the Battle of Stalingrad. Castle Itter, again, had this same feel. There was this, attack on this castle from all sides of German SS forces, and you kind of had a valiant defense, hence the name of that location of the castle. And similarly, in Soldiers in Postmen's Uniform, you had the Polish defenders holding out on this post office against a wave of German attacks, and holding out to the last person. And then Lanzerath Ridge was the very, kind of the tip of the spear, so to speak. It was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. This is in Belgium. This is German forces that were coming up to this ridge, which were held by, really, they were combat soldiers, but they really were not combat soldiers. They were more like forward observers and radio officers and communication soldiers. that were in advanced position, and they got kind of overwhelmed. But it was their efforts and heroic efforts to hold out for an entire day against insurmountable odds tells a very interesting story. So that's something that's very common with these games is they tell a story, and they're telling a story that is not a very well-known story. Out of all these, probably Pavlov's House was maybe the most well-known of these stories. I didn't know anything about Castle Itter until I, got this game, and then I found some books on it, then read up on it, and the more I read, the more amazed I was. Same is true for the defense of the post office in Soldiers and Postmen's Uniform, or at Lanzerath Ridge. I really didn't know anything about this, the heroic efforts of these few soldiers that held off wave after wave of German advance. So anyway, that's some of the common elements to these games. Let's get into the scale a little bit. Let's start with the broadest view, or the most expansive angle, to take a look at all the action that's going to take place in the game. And the game that has kind of the highest level view is Pavlov's House, which, as you look at it here, you actually have 3 maps, or 3 levels of scale in this game. On the far right here, you have an operational map, which is basically the main thing that's going on here is you're trying to get supplies over the river so that you can get them to Pavlov's house. So you're going to be getting them all kinds of, food and wet bullets and what have you to supply Pavlov's house. And along this map, there's going to be, they're trying to cut out communications. There's going to be artillery. There's going to be actions that are taking place at a very high level scale. And as you can see here, this goes over to this part right here. This is where Pavlov's house is at, or where the main action's at. Then you go down to a kind of a medium level scale, and that's the middle of the map. And as you can see here, here's Pavlov's house, but then you can see all the troops converging on that point. Now, this is where you start to get into kind of the states of siege. If any of you are familiar with that, that was a system that was used a lot by Victory Point Games. I don't think they're around anymore, or maybe they've sold off most of their games to other people. I know that Worthington is doing a lot of their games now. But Victory Point Games, which was a notch above do-it-yourself. Now, they eventually got some decent quality, but some of their earlier games really kind of had a little bit of a do-it-yourself type feel, or print-and-play type feel. But they had a lot of games in their States of Siege series. I think this might have been one of the first ones they did. In the States of Siege series. This one is probably one of the most well-known ones. Actually, that might have been earlier, but this was one of the more well-known ones, Zulus on the Ramparts. They did the Alamo, Levy en Masse, and again, I think Worthington is redoing this one. This one's coveted. A lot of people want this one to be redone. I think Worthington did this one, Keep Up the Fire, and Soviet Dawn. This one's done by several different people, I believe, and then Ottoman Sunset, and then I also have a Habsburg Eclipse. But that wasn't in a Ziploc. They finally got that in a box. They started boxing their games. But one of the core aspects of the States of Siege is that you have a center point that you have to keep the forces that are invading, whatever the case may be. And in those different themed games, there were different forces over time in history. But you had to keep them at bay and keep them out of the center square, so to speak. If they ever got to the center square, you lose the game. And your mainly way you win the game is you go through a deck of cards that you flip over each turn, and those cards are moving forces closer to the middle, and then you're trying to stave them off or keep them back. That's a general States of Siege, or in the Euro hobby or hobby game, it's like castle defense type game. And there's several games that have that kind of theme as well. You have all these invaders coming from all different sides, and then you're trying to hold them off and keep them out of the castle, or keep them out of the center. So this aspect of the board kind of gets to some of that States of Siege type element. that is going on. And then as you go to the next level, this goes down deeper, a little bit closer in, and you actually get to Pavlov's house. And so what's going on in Pavlov's house? Well, there's a radio room. You have some reserves that are going to come out of this spot. This is where those supplies that you're getting from the earlier map to here, where you're going to be using some of those supplies, and then you're going to have different individuals. You're actually going to have individual units. So you're down at the individual level, manning these different locations. And if you see this box here, like this, these people in green can fire at the ones in green. The ones in red can fire at the ones in red. The ones in purple, you got it, can fire at the ones in purple. So you're at the individual level, moving these individual soldiers around this house, and they are firing, or they're issuing commands, and they're readying some of the other troops. Each of the individual soldiers are going to have individual abilities. That's another thing that's kind of common throughout each of these 4 games, is that when you get to the individual level, the individual counters or individual soldiers each have different abilities. They might be, might have benefits to firing a machine gun, or they might have commands where they can ready other people, or they might be, medics or something that can actually heal or turn people, remove hits or something from people. I mean, there's different abilities for each of the different individuals, and then of course each of the different games might change that up as well. They're not all the rules are not necessarily the same for the individual abilities, but there are some commonalities, and there's some familiarity. Once you've played 1 or 2 of these, you're going to recognize some of those. So on this one, you have 3 levels of scale. The widest angle, a little bit closer in, and then you're actually manning things inside the house. The next one that I like to go to would be Lanzerath Ridge, which is the latest one here. And the reason why I go to this one next is it is a little bit wider out. Now this is the one map where you don't have an individual house or location that you're doing man-to-man combat in. They're basically manning this ridge. And so on the bottom half of this board or map, which is nicely done. I mean, this to me is very evocative of the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. It's got a little bit of a wintry feel to it, and just nicely done, but that's my opinion, right? The Germans are going to set up here, and they're going to be advancing along these tracks. And again, you have that States of Siege type effect where you'll be drawing from a deck of cards. That's the enemy AI, so to speak, or that's the engine that's going to move the enemy forward. And whatever you draw, that unit's going to pop up, and you might have to roll to see which track it goes on, or it might tell you which track it goes on, or it might just tell you to put in like a machine gun nest. These squares here are like for machine gun nests. And you'll flip that card over, and then they'll start moving and advancing. This board has unique things that are unique instances and rules and events that are only for this battle. So like there's this barbed wire line here, and there's a little counter that you put in there, and that will stop the Germans from advancing any further until they have to remove that. And there's also some booby traps. There's some grenades and some booby traps, like in these little dots right here, that are along those tracks, that if a German advance, the first German unit to advance by that is going to take a hit or get destroyed because of those traps that were set for them. So those are some things that are unique to this game and to this board. But then you have the common features, like any units in here can fire from the brown. They can hit stuff that's on the brown track, or they can hit stuff on the orange track. Over here, this one on blue can hit stuff on the blue track or hit stuff on the brown track. So it has some of that same, built-in line of sight, which is kind of an interesting, unique thing to this game. To me, that's a little bit reminiscent to Tannhauser. That's an old Euro game with minis. That was kind of a skirmish game, but the line of sight was superimposed on the board. So if you could tell just by looking at what hex you were in, colored hex, and you can tell who you can hit. And that's actually been translated into Unmatched, and I've done some videos on that. So it has the line of sight superimposed on the board. So that's the same here. You have the line of sight that's kind of superimposed on the board. So it makes it really easy to understand what box you're in, what you can hit. So you're going to have the cards that are advancing the Germans forward, and then you're manning the defense. You get to decide what units you have, and you only have limited units. And again, you're at the individual level. So you're back to that, the farthest or the closest in level all the time here, but you're in a wider space than a single house or inside a building. You're covering this entire ridge, but you are at the individual level. And that's one of the unique things about this story that it's telling, is that it's these few soldiers that were really like communications officers and the like, or communication soldiers unit. They were defending a large area against a large amount of troops. And so that's kind of the unique nature here. And of course, they're going to have special abilities. Some might man machine guns better. And then, of course, you have individual weapons that you're moving around from place to place here as well. Wherever you set the machine gun up, if you want to move a machine gun over to another area, you've got to literally take it down and then move it over there. This is very tactical, very much an individual level. There's also other rules here. Because they were advanced or forward observers and radio operators. There's a radio truck for artillery, and there's a radio jeep there as well. Those factor in to this game as well, to like victory points, or actually for the artillery, you can actually call in strikes, and that will help stave off some of the Germans. And the like. So, and again, just like in the States of Siege series, you're trying to get through a deck, right? You have to get through that deck to survive the day. And in real life, only one person was killed. Only one of these soldiers was killed, and the rest were captured. But they did stave off this entire unit here, or these entire German force for an entire day. So this is the next level of scale. Again, no individual buildings, but you are all at the individual level on their side of the map, or on the Allied side of the map. But you have a wide open ridge that you are manning. The next scale that I'd probably like to talk about is Castle Itter. In that, now you might say, well, why am I going to this? Because this is pretty much an individual building here. But my method, the madness to my method will become apparent. So this is Castle Itter, and this one is, you kind of have a little bit of a wider area, in that you have this gate here, or you got this tank that's kind of blocking the area here. Then you have like a gatehouse, then you have a wall, and then you have some other walls over here. So you do have a larger area than just like Pavlov's house. But then you get back to kind of the Pavlov's house type situation, where the castle itself and what's going on in the castle itself. And so you have that same kind of effect of, people, if you're located in the red boxes, you can attack stuff that's on the red. If you're on the yellow, purple, green, we've got that down, right? But you're also going to be moving units out here as well. So they might be doing some activity as well. But this one is, to me, is the closest to just the straight-on States of Siege, because that's all this is. These guys are just coming up from these different tracks, and you are trying to stave them off. Now, there's some unique rules to this as well on that are unique to the situation. You're trying to get a prisoner. One of the prisoners, or one of the people that were held at the castle, are trying to get them out so they can go warn the U.S. and get some more reinforcements. And so that's part of the game as well, of trying to get somebody out and not have them be captured or killed by the Germans that are coming in. You've got this tank over here, and how that's going to play out, or run out of ammo, and then trying to get those guys back. So there is, and so here's that cellar where you're trying to get some people out of the cellar, and then get them to safety, or get one to release to get to warn or get reinforcements. So there's some other things going on here, but this is the closest to States of Siege. A little bit more than just an individual house, but a lot of it just focusing on getting to that house. So then the last area, the area that we're really getting down to the closest, and I'll explain why I take it that way, is the soldiers in postmen's uniforms, which, and I have to, if I haven't said this already, both Soldiersman's Postman's uniform and Lanzerath Ridge were sent to me by DVG, so I want to thank them for the review copies, and I've done unboxings and some some commentary on that, so I'll put those links in my description of this. But again, I want to thank DVG for sending me these, because I really do appreciate it. So now we get to soldiers and postmen's uniform. So why do I think this is like the most in scale? Well, you still have that states of siege type effect on the outside of the post office. This is the different tracks that the German forces are going to take. And then this is the building itself. So you've still got a little bit of that states of siege. So why isn't this one at a higher level than Castle Itter? Well, the reason why I kind of put this at the most most inset level, or the closest in, is because you actually do a lot of activity inside the building itself, inside the post office, and it's based on what floor you're on. So you have these different floors inside the post office, and there's a stairwell, and you're going to be throwing bombs in the stairwell and all that stuff. But what goes on where if you have something on the top floor, then, I mean, you've got to go and literally move down and get stuff down to the lower floor, like ammunition and stuff like that. So there's quite a lot of, real tactical and inset type activity based on what floor you're on. So to me, I find this a little bit even more focused, because not only are you just inside a house like you are with Pavlov's house or Castle Itter, or inside a building, but it's the levels within the building that you're actually interacting with and engaging. And so a lot more, a much closer inset view in that regard. And plus, there are special rules for this. There were some civilians that were in this post office, and so part of the game is you're trying to protect them and make sure that they're not, if they're killed, then that's going, it's horrible, right? Anyway, but because this is a tragic story, but that's going to affect victory conditions. I hate to reduce everything to victory or victory points, but it's a game, right? This is a game, not reality. Anyway, so this is the lowest level, or the most inset level, I would say, as we're going down in scale, just because of all the activity that goes on inside the building. So let's talk a little bit about the components and some of the way these games play out. And I'm looking at the Castle Itter board, which again to me is kind of the most straight up states of siege type situation, given that there's a central location and you have the tracks that are around here. And so you're going to have this deck of cards that you have to get through. Again, one of the common themes here that translates over from states of siege series of games is getting through a deck to win the game. And this one has a deck, and then there's going to have this card that if you get to this, then the game ends immediately. These are the reinforcements. And I believe you have to get somebody released from the cellar to get out to safety to put this card in the deck. I believe it's been a while since I played this. I've played the other ones so much more since then. But so this is an example of some of the cards that are going to come out, or the cards you're going to turn over each turn to see what's coming out, right? And it tells you kind of where it's placed, and you have like a defense value to it to try to what you have to roll. This is the combat here is a rolling of dice to have greater than the number to try to take stuff out. But there, you can see there's mortars that can come in. There's all kinds of different things that could come after you. And then there's actually artillery attacks. So the AI deck can get relatively nasty. And there are rules setting up on how you set this up and how this stuff plays out over the game. And then, of course, some of your abilities play out differently as well. And then you'll actually have the counters themselves that will come on the board in very, in typical DVG fashion, very thick counters, And here's an example of some of them that come out there. Those are all the same, of course, because that's what I pulled out of the bag there. And then you have the individuals that are going to be, your forces that you're manning in the house and around the house in this case as well. But and then so there are some people that like you are fighting with the Germans too. So these are some of the people that were held. Some of these start in the cellar and they can come up and do certain things, but all these notations mean something different, and they do mean something different in the different games as well. They're not all necessarily transferable. Like the R means something in this game, but there might be different ones in the other game. But you can see here all the different units that are in here. And this one has, like, when they're exhausted, I think, or after you use it, then they go over to the exhausted side. And that's a common theme throughout these games too, is you're dealing with individuals. And so using their ability or attacking or defending, they're going to get exhausted. And so that's a kind of the puzzle that fits in here, is that you're trying to flip them back over to their active side so they can do something more, but it's just not easy to do that. There's different rules overall for these games on how you can flip somebody back over. Some of them is it's just an automatic action. In Lanzerath Ridge, it's very tight. You have to use like a command action, or there's a certain units that can use their ability to flip somebody over, but when you use their ability, they flip over to exhausted, and so it's a little bit of a puzzle that comes into that. As you can, the art on these have gotten better as the game goes on, or as the development goes on. For example, this is soldiers in Postmen's uniform. There are three attacks. There's the morning, midday, and evening. Again, it's tied to the thematic nature and the historic nature of that event. And so you have these three different attacks, and there's going to be different things that happen during different parts of the day. Like there's a fire truck, I think, that comes up at the in the evening. And that's the end of the game because the building was on fire at that time. But there's different things that are going to come into play depending on what deck you're in, and you need to get through all three of the decks in this case to get to the end of the game. So here's like attack morning, and so here are some of the things that come out, and it's just, you can see the art there. It looks pretty cool, and it will tell you like where it places on the track. So these are the different leaders, and you got a machine gunner, and so this is all the really cool art there. But so very thematic, and there's different sets of cards for that. Then you get to Lanzerath Ridge, which is the current game that just came out in this series. And look at the art that's on here. That's kind of indicative of that map that we saw earlier, but a really nice graphic rendition here. And this is the assault cards. So this is when they're coming on the board. Leaders do certain things. Leaders can remove that barbed wire if down the road. There's mortar fire, MG42, so all kinds of different things. And then this one has there's different decks in this too. I think there's 3 or 4 decks in this. Yeah, I think there's 4 decks in this that you have to get through. So a lot more involved, a lot more attacks, and there's more stuff that happens in the later decks. There's certain things that take place, like for example, there's a medic or a forward observer that's disguised as a medic. And so there's these medics that come on the board. You've got to kind of identify who they are, and there's a special action to do that, but it takes up an action of one of your individuals, so that person's not going to be shooting. And you're trying to identify that medic, because if that forward observer, gets to the front or gets to a certain location, or close enough to you, then they can call in when there's artillery strikes. It's going to be even more devastating because the forward observer is pointing out where to hit. Very thematic, right? And that happened in history. There was some medics, and they were disguised, or forward observers disguised as medics, that were calling in some airstrikes or some artillery strikes, I should say. So again, very thematic, and as I said, the cards and the units, tell the story as you go on. Now, the Pavlov's house is even more evolved, because remember, you have those 3 maps. So there's different things that are going on in the far side of the map, which deals with, you know, the supplies and getting the supplies over the river. And also with that too, you're having to determine what supplies you're putting there, right? So if some of these supplies get knocked out, they get knocked out. You're not going to get them, but you're also determining kind of the order of those supplies as well. So there's different things going on here. There's communication lines, there's artillery, there's some airstrikes that happen on this map. This is at a much higher view, and a lot of things going on. So there's different counters that go on this map as than the other maps. Then you get to that middle map, as we looked at before, which is more of the stage of siege type map, and this is where the different forces are advancing along that track. And then you get to what's going on in the house. Now, these two kind of go hand in hand, because what you're doing here and where you're firing out of hit those different tracks there. So these two are more closely connected than this one. This one's a little bit of a higher level and just getting the supplies, and what if these get knocked out here, you're not going to get them here. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to kind of talk about today in this deep dive. This is just an amazing series of games, and some just great art that's on there, and great gameplay. They're all solitaire. So if you're looking for something that you want to play with a group, you know, there's probably a way you can possibly play these cooperatively, but you know, these are really meant to be solitaire play. And there's not, even though you see a lot of bits and cards and counters, the setup is not that extreme, right? These can be set up relatively quickly, and if you've played them a couple of times, it's just like getting back on a bike or getting back on a horse. You're gonna pick it up, and a lot of the mechanics again do translate. If you're familiar with one of these games, then it's not going to be that hard to get to the other one. Although there are differences, each one is different because they're tailored to the unique story that they're trying to convey. And that's one thing I like to end on, is these are telling a story. Each one of these games are really telling the story, and in most cases a story that is not that well known, or not as talked about as some of the other ones that we've heard about World War II. And again, these are all currently World War II. And so and that to me is really something that is key to a solitaire game, especially a narrative-driven solitaire game. You're telling the story. The story's going to come out a little bit different than the way it happened historically, but it's going to be interesting. Every time you play this is going to be a different and an interesting story of how it took place. And since there's such an individual touch, you know, because you're dealing with actual individual soldiers, you know, there's a certain sense of bonding to that story, right? You're going to get a little bit more immersed, a little bit more connected to what's going on. And again, that makes for a good game and a great solitaire game. Anyway, that's what I have for you today on my deep dive. Love to know your thoughts on any of these 4 games and what you think about them, you know, good, bad, and ugly. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, and have a good one. Thanks for watching.